Hello and welcome to my cellar. It was Cinco de Mayo when I started to make this. It'll be Cinco de 7th, I guess, when you see this. All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Watching an interesting documentary about how the Scottish towns accidentally ended up underground after constructions of large main roads of dirt. They made excellent dungeons, but no sewer level. Well, that does give you an interesting idea. It gives me, at least, an interesting idea on an idea of a village somewhere that was buried in a landslide, supposedly wiped out in an avalanche, and preserved and entombed for hundreds or, however long time, now abandoned. And I say abandoned only in that humanoids, of course, any manner of evil, nasty things could have found a way to sneak back in and use it as a lair. But there's a possibility there that, and upon finding something like this, there's a possibility for some really fun magic to go back and see it as it was, and not, or be able to interact with it or not, whatever. Anyway, it's a neat idea. That's what it sparked in my head when I read the comment. In game, I am calling cleric spells prayers from here on. It makes so much more sense, and vice versa in real life. Well, thank you. And yeah, in real life, I can't think of any organized religion that likes to say that they cast spells, because that's anathema in terms of brainwashing and getting people to do things just because, you tell them God said to, whoever their God is that they believe in. Okay, for next week, I would like to know your thoughts on the idea of the mega dungeon, and have you ever ran or played in one? Well, I'm going to assume mega dungeon is something more than a couple, 3 levels, in which case Greyhawk would have fit in, because not only was it multiple levels, when a given level got cleaned out, well, lo and behold, at some point in the future, that level got repopulated by something else. There was a level in Gary's Dungeon that everybody just called the orc level, because that's all that ever was there. They'd clean them out, and the orcs would be back later on. In that sense, if that's what you mean by a mega dungeon, lots of pieces available at any given time and some not available. It certainly worked for Gary and Rob when they were running Greyhawk in Lake Geneva. Now, if you're talking about something like Mike Curtis's Stonehill Dungeon, which is just enormous and level after level after level, while I won't criticize Mike's work because he's an excellent writer, my own personal quirks have a hard time justifying why something that enormous would have been dug in the first place. And my God, you get 27 levels down, and it's got to be getting hot down there, the magma. I'm not in. I'd rather make a bunch of smaller ones, and then maybe in terms of game time several years later, go back and revisit it. Of course, seismic upheavals would have closed tunnels that had been open here and there and caused cave-ins, and it might have opened up one that had been open before. So in terms of the DM, it saves a lot of work. In terms of the players, they're sort of familiar with it, but not exactly. That I would have no problem with. I can't see anything more than a small city's having a couple levels underneath, perhaps from the city being rebuilt upon itself, as archaeologists are finding today happen lots and lots of times. Like part of Seattle that's underground. Beyond that, it's just not my thing. And I'll go more into what is my thing in a later comment. I was looking up some Dave Trampier art and consequently started to read about his life. This may be a dumb question, but do you know anything about why he disappeared at the height of his career and became so reclusive, or the origins of his seemingly intense hatred of TSR? Also, what do you think the alternate history of TSR would be today had Kevin Bloom not entered the picture? Not looking for you to bash anyone, but genuinely curious. Well, and I'm sure you won't be terribly upset if somebody gets bashed along the way. All right, as for Tramp, I can only give you what I think the case was based on the people I've talked to over the years and what I know about the various aspects of his situation. It's easier to start with the last question first, and I believe his intense hatred of all things TSR came about as a result of being told that, oh, by the way, everything you do for us, we own. And I'm pretty sure there was some sort of falling out over ownership of his work. And he realized that he got steamrolled or would be steamrolled or couldn't fight it and got disgusted and left. Now, there's an odd thing here. I'm going to interject here for a minute. And that is that I don't believe Dave ever signed a paper. I know I didn't, probably because they didn't think of it. But I never signed anything that said that anything I created belonged to TSR while I was employed by them. Not once, ever. In fact, as I was driving home today from taking a friend to his doctor's appointment, I considered the fact that I owned the boulet. I created it, and TSR never did own it. Because as it was published in the magazine, everything in the magazine was first rights only, and a modest stipend if it should be included later in a greatest of type thing. And all the editions of D&D that Wizards of the Coast has put out that have the boulet in it, all the things they've done to the boulet and the swamp boulet and the forest boulet and all that shit, I wonder, at $0.25 cents per copy, how many cents would that total up to if I sued him and won? Anyway, and that is germane to your question, because I don't believe that Tramp ever signed one. Now, it may be that the other version I've heard, they presented him with such a document, and he said, absolutely not, fuck you. I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in those two rather closely meshing versions. Now, as to what happened, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, and I lost touch with Tramp just like everybody else did. But again, from what I can piece together, Tramp and I smoked pot together. To my knowledge, up to that point in time, Tramp never did any other kind of drugs, as far as I'm aware. Tramp got married. Apparently his wife had or developed a fondness for pills and became dependent. And I don't know, but it might be that Tramp did also. It's hard to say once you go down that rabbit hole. It's hard to say what's what and when you might come out. I'm certain he was despondent from all his magnificent work being essentially, his work that he thought was his, they were claiming wasn't. Of course, there was no signed papers that I'm aware of. And because I'm sure if they'd have come to him with one, he'd have come to me and asked what the hell's going on. Because I never gave him anything like that through the magazine. But I mentioned it was a combination of depression, despondency, anger, certainly anger, and watching his wife spiral into the rabbit hole. Somewhere in there. Now, the other part of your question. In my opinion, Kevin Bloom was the worst thing that ever came to happen to be part of or whatever TSR. He was a tasteless little shit who had no sense of the gaming industry. He was a bean counter. He had a shrew of a wife who stuck her nose in everybody's business, though she was never officially employed by TSR at any of the time, during any of the time that I was there. And she did literally, this is the truth, buy their clothes out of Fredericks of Hollywood's catalog. She would bring him to the company dinners and that, looking like a zoot suit pimp from Hollywood. And she wore stuff that showed off all her charms to great extent. Too much so. Yes, I think he was a mean little malignant toad. And didn't have any more common sense than Brian, apparently, because it was the two of them that hatched up the, let's go buy, 5 dozen cars, let's go get a helicopter. I mean, what was up with that? They both were just, I think, feeding on each other's idiocy. But that's just my opinion. Shout out to your new video editor. End credits are looking good. Nice ending with the space explosion noise and the long fade on the last title card. Well, Emmerich, if you're listening to this as you're working on it, you'll be glad to know that your work is appreciated. And that PS to that comment, kudos to your past video editor, too. Always a class job on your videos. Well, thank you. I can't see doing a sloppy one. I did a few sloppy ones on my own. Didn't need to keep doing that. Concerning magic users in your world, Wheel of Blame games, totally understands how magic users as written are a bad fit for this kind of one-off. But have you considered including one with a pre-selected list of spells? No. And I'll tell you why in a minute. You can ensure that way you didn't have a character with either irrelevant magic nor magic that circumvents challenges in unsatisfying ways. Maybe this in some way defeats the purpose of playing a magic user, but a pre-gen spell list could also be a puzzle of sorts, where a prepared spell relevant to some niche aspect of the dungeon has to be recognized as such by the player. Again, no. And here's why. I'll tell you why. No two Wheels of Blame ever play the same. Not in the least. With the only exception being that there are pre-gens that are used and used again by whoever. The reason it's never the same, every player in the game gives me a note card with 2 things on it. And from those 2 things, I then, on the spot, start to weave the adventure. It's the ultimate railroad game because you always have to go ahead to the next encounter. Now, why is it never the same? Because these are cards from a game I ran online about a year ago. The things that I was given. This card has a teapot and a crown. This card has a boule and a unicorn. This card has penguin and garden gnome. This one has Fabergé egg and a 3-ring circus. This one has a weeping willow and a white tiger. This card has buzzsaw and a living statue. I've had cards that had red dragon and pickle, undead vixens and portal to another world. The point I'm making is I have no way of knowing what the next group is going to give me. Now that I'm having people play repeat games, they're trying to get even said, oh, well, we can't do anything with this one. And it's my task to create each encounter. Every encounter is based on one of those cards. So, the Weeping Willow and the White Tiger, I had the rather stereotypical Weeping Willow, except it also could grab you, and it cried and lured people in. And the White Tiger was an ensorcelled maiden who was chained to the Weeping Willow. I think it was a year ago. I've done so many of these since. Fabergé egg and a 3-ring circus. I actually put a flea circus inside a really large, heavily decorated, jewel-encrusted, and gold-trimmed out egg shape. But of course, that was the meat of the matter, and getting there and getting access to it and everything, that was the encounter part. So there's really no way that I can know in advance. There's no way I can pick a list that will promise to be in any way useful on that adventure based on what those cards give me to work out with. Now, it might take place underground, it might take above ground, it might be in the air, it might be underwater. That's the magical nature of the Wheel of Blame, which doesn't exist in any one dimension at one time. Okay. That's why. Agree on not always or even often letting player know the odds. DC, difficulty challenge, or whatever that means, is first a DM tool. Very rarely do I see a DM just tell the players what the DC is. They usually just say roll, and the player tells them what they roll, and the DM tells them what happens. The DC is just a rubric from the DM. Okay, on that basis, I would never tell them anyway. I'd just say, roll me a 20. Now, sometimes I'll have them say, okay, roll me a 20 on your strength. And so they have to roll their strength or less. Or sometimes if they're going to do something really easy, all right, name me superhuman strength, I'll tell them, okay, roll me something that exceeds your strength. That's just a weak example, but yeah, okay. I tend to make those numbers up in my head as I go. I would never find a list I would agree with that's a 3 and that's a 4 or whatever. Anyway, okay. Where did the theory of elves having a long lifespan come from? All right. Mainly from Tolkien, who took it from the northern Germanic, Celtic, and a little bit of Nordic mythos. Now, I got a book here I want to show you. Great book. Now, because of Tolkien, we have this image that all the elves look like Legolas or Galadriel. When actually, when you look at elf illustrations of elves from, say, 100 years or so ago, before the Insidious influence, and by the way, the name of this book is called Fantastic People, published in 1980. It's a great book full of wonderful illustrations and information about various magical creatures. Now, illustrations of elves back in this period, before Tolkien, ranged from, and I know this doesn't always work with a glare, but I'll try to get it. All right, you see the little pink guy and the little guy with the pointy hat and the big shoes. Okay, that was one idea of elves. And then you have on the other page, whoops, okay, I got to remember which way I'm going. Another picture of an elf. Okay, they were not the tall, slender, muscular, buff. All right, they were very often very small, very diminutive. There's some others in here. They are also, they were sly. They weren't nice and friendly and, automatically allies of humanity. They were sly, often pictured with long pointy ears and long pointy nose, narrow chins. Okay, that's another stereotype from before Tolkien. And sometimes they were just plain scary. And they were, like I said, often mischievous. They weren't human-sized. They were, children-sized, child-sized, if you will. So the various writers who wrote about them and the various folk tales that were passed down always accredited them with being a long-lived race. The Sidhe, the Celtic Sidhe, are the Celtic equivalent of an elf. And they lived in their barrow mounds for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And the occasional mortal that got sucked into one came out only to find out what he thought was 3 weeks had been 3 decades. So they weren't very nice. They weren't friends of mankind or anything like that. And they were long-lived. So you have to go back to Celto-Germanic Nordic myth, I guess. Okay, next question. This concerns Thaco and armor class when dealing with low-level characters, such as a level 0 fighting man. Okay, now the level 0 fighting man is what you used to be until you went on the adventurer's trail. Or in this case, if it's part of an army or something, they probably have a little more training than you did. But anyway, the way I understand the rules, fighters can wear basically any armor, however, and basically any armor. In my opinion, I feel that a level 0 fighter with an armor class of 0 or greater is a bit overpowered. Special circumstances not considered, such as being placed on the quest by a deity. I feel there should be a limit on each class level should be allowed to wear. Otherwise, there would be level 0 characters running around with armor class a level 0 character wouldn't be able to hit. What is the official rules on each level is allowed and not allowed? Now, there were 2 comments in reply to that. Fighters can wear any armor they can afford. This is clearly explained in the fighter description. And it is. So, the next comment, and I'll come back to that in a second. Do you as a DM want a bunch of level 0 fighters with an armor class of -3 running around in your campaign? Now, if they have something magical, then I can see a reason for it, because every living or non-living entity would be would be attracted to them. Okay, yeah, I got it now. Bad punctuation. Because every living or non-living entity would be attracted to them like flies. However, and now hold that thought. However, under normal circumstances, having a party with level 0 characters with an armor class of anything greater than 0 is not only unbalanced, but will be overpowered as a DM and playing by the rules of if your level 0 character, your Thaco is 20, so if their armor class is greater than 0, you have no chance of doing any damage. That's why I feel there should be ability and or level restrictions on armor and weapons. Well, there is. It's called the DM. And I don't mean that to be quite as flippant as it says, but I mean, no DM passed building their first time dungeon. Okay, first dungeon that they build is going to put a bunch of mithril shirts out to be found by a bunch of low-level pukes. Because yes, that will overpower the game. And it will probably require you as a DM to artificially come up with something to counteract that. Now, keep in mind that thought about every bad low-level scumsucker is going to be out looking to take that armor off of you. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And as the DM, feel free to have some attack in a dark alley one night and roll them, mug them, whatever. Feel free. Absolutely, it will attract thieves and greedy, aspiring would-be thieves or would-be fighters. Certainly, you got to be able to defend. You got to be able to defend what you wear. And if you can't, well, too bad. Would I let them find something, like a suit of mail or a hauberk of really fine chain or something like that? Sure. But now remember, I go from 9 down. That's how I count armor, 9 being what I'm wearing. And no, you're not going to give them a bunch of armor class 1 chain shirts. Why would you? To find a chain shirt that gives you another 1 plus 1 or even plus 2, that's okay. But to give them just, like Iron Man suit, well, you got to expect that they're going to trash the campaign. You don't, by the same token, you don't put singing swords a la Prince Valiant or high ego intelligence swords out there for first and second levels to find. Now, let me qualify that. They can be found by them, but if they immediately find out that it is, a sword with an intelligence, and they go ahead and draw it anyway, well, they're stupid and they deserve to have the sword take them over and run around the countryside killing bigger and bigger things until somebody kills you. But if they don't, and they take it and they find a willing buyer for it, and maybe not right away, but as one of my DM rules has always been, eventually they'll always be a willing buyer for just about anything I want to get out of the campaign. Now, that hasn't happened nearly as much as it used to in the very first years I was doing it, because I didn't know any better. But I learned. Very first dungeon, I put a ring of polymorph self. Never again will I put anything that powerful in the possession of a bunch of low levels. You gotta keep the tonsils wet. Okay. All right, here we go. This week's inanities. Cheddar cheese doesn't have to be orange, everyone. So maybe that means bring nacho with blue tortilla chips and non-orange cheese to the next game with Tim. Comment in reply. No Doritos, since they can lead to messy sheets and tables. Reply by the original poster. What is an RPG D&D without the fine art and joy of teasing someone else's pet peeve? Yeah, there's lots of other equally flaky foods that have crumbs, like maybe cherry pies. Why is orange-colored food worse than the others? All right, let's talk about eating at the table. If it's your character sheet, I don't care how much of a slob you are. You can wipe ketchup on it. I don't care. It's your character sheet. However, if there's anything else at the table that's being passed around as a play aid or whatever that doesn't belong to you, I don't want your ketchup on it. I find that I like to eat cheese curls. I like to eat Doritos. But I also find that orange is about the most repulsive fingerprint or smudge. Regular chips, corn chips, whatever, without any artificial coloring, will still leave a grease spot. If you're eating a greasy food, don't touch anything that belongs to me. And if I am, I won't touch anything that belongs to you. When we were running long games, we often took a short break somewhere around the middle or lunch or whatever it was, went and got lunch, came back, brought it back and ate it. But we didn't leave greasy thumbprints all over anything. We didn't get grease all over the dice. And maybe because I was a bit anal about it, because for the longest time, all the rules, the only set of rules and all the dice belonged to me. But by the same token, crumbs, mess, whatever. The pie game, I give out napkins, plates, forks with every piece of pie. And it's just a tradition thing. Would I have pie every other Wednesday when my buddies come over to play games? No. I do put out dishes of various candies and stuff. But hey, they're adults. And they wipe their fingers. And they don't spill all over the table. Unfortunately, at cons, you can't say that about everybody. Either the adult part or the spill part. Okay, I did a little spiel on somebody talking about the word dungeon master. This is a reply to that. No one is saying DM is racist and or needs to be banned. Yes, there are. Right now it's just a few howling lunatics in the wilderness. But that's how all this woke crap started. People need to stop believing everything they hear from a friend on social media just to get riled up. Well, I've read enough of the social media posts declaring it. I didn't hear it from somebody or a friend of a friend of a friend. Racist. No, kinky sexist maybe. Okay, and this is from the week before. And I missed it. I don't know how. And I wanted to address it. I don't think I addressed it anyway. What does role-playing mean to you and why? To you, how does role-playing come up in the game? Did that ever change for you, Gary, over the years? Role-playing with regards to backstory or role-playing without backstory? Do you have a preference? Why? To you, is one bad role-playing that shouldn't... To you, is one bad role-playing that... Oh, what is to me something that shouldn't be done? I hate voices. I hate people thinking they gotta be a Playhouse in the Park weekend actor. Hate it. Oh, now, that didn't mean that one time at I don't even think it was even a Gary Con. It might have been a Lake Geneva Game Convention. I slipped into Slytherin, or Parseltongue rather, and to this day I haven't been able to do it nearly as well as I did at that day and mesmerize the whole table as I started talking to him as a snake. And if somebody's going to do that, I think it's the DM's prerogative. If he's going to assume a non-player character, if he wants to. But don't you. Oh, please don't do that at my table. You're probably not nearly as good at it as you think. And I find it annoying. And if I get annoyed enough, I get peckish. And when I get peckish, blue bolts start coming out of the ceiling. How does role-playing come up in the game? Well, I learned from Gary, and the rules, and from Rob. And role-playing in the game is acting like who you're supposed to be. If you're playing a fighter with an intelligence of 10, now remember that's average. 9 to 12 is considered average. And don't tell me that you've just figured out this really complex something that's way beyond your pay scale, way over your pay grade, however you want to phrase it. That's role playing. Playing to the limits of your stats is role playing. If you got a big, hefty, brawny strength, then you should be the one doing hefty, brawny things. Obviously. If you're the sly, clever one, then you should be doing sly, clever things. Don't try to figure out nuclear physics with an intelligence stat of 10. I'm not going to let you. Don't use a voice. That's bad role playing. And that's how I deal with it. They're going to say, well, what was your intelligence? I don't think you figured that out. And it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. I'll crack them gently with a smile. But I will call them on that. No, you're burning brain cells now. Be quiet. Because that's their character. Now, if they're playing a character with a 17 intelligence, well, of course I'm going to let them weasel and ferret out things. Because the character has the intelligence. Now, it's very, very hard for a smart human being to play a character of a low middling intelligence. Very hard. The only person that's ever done it well is Tom Hanks and Forrest Gump. That's the nub of it for me. Backstory, no backstory. If I were to start a new campaign again, I would not have anybody come in with a backstory other than 3 sentences. And I stole that idea from Duck Quest. And that's all the backstory. And in it, you would have to justify what that big cudgel thing is you're carrying over your shoulder, or whatever. That's it. It's been pointed out by many people many times. The best way to get your character killed off quickly, and it's not by DM fiat, it's just seemingly the gods, GAWDS as Jolly spells them, the gaming gods, smackdown hubris. So if you come to the first session of the first adventure with a 3-page backstory, you're inevitably going to die, and all that 3-page backstory will have been wasted. Backstory can come out over the course of time as the character reveals a little of his past. Say the character makes a bunch of successive agility rolls and becomes, in effect, the party's thief, or the mechanism tinkerer, or whatever. Well, as this trait has been used a few times, there's a place to insert some backstory, because as a boy, you just love playing with making small models at work, building boats, snares, catapults. those, out of sticks and twigs and whatever. And so now you have the beginning of how you got to be this artificer or this lockpick or whatever. That works. And with that, I think that about winds it down. So, if you're not a subscriber, please do. And let's see, what else? These things get more or less boring based on the comments I'm given to respond to. So it's up to you. And with that, I'll say, da-da-da-govi.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with Tramp under a tree, high as could be.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Curmudgeon.